Hello, everybody. We are here today talking with Elaine Keane, who's one of our scholar instructors at the Qualitative Research Summer Intensive, our qualitative conversation series here. I'm Maietta with my colleagues Paul Mihas and Jeff Petruzzelli. And Elaine, we're looking forward to sharing a conversation with you about a course you're offering on July 23rd this year, Qualitative Data Generation, Conducting Interviews, Focus Groups, and Field Observations. Elaine, do you have the expression wear multiple hats? We have this whole expression where people balance, and juggle several different roles like you do. So anyway, why don't you give just first your introduction of who you are and your professional affiliation and job, and then we'll switch gears and talk about the course.
That's great. Thanks, Ray. So I'm Elaine Keane. I'm professor in Sociology of Education and Research Methods in the School of Education, University of Galway, where I am also, for my sins, as we say in Ireland, head of the discipline of education. I'm here 21 years now, but I have long had a really strong interest in qualitative research methodologies, and it's been my passion to teach it. So this is my second year involved, as you know, with ResearchTalk, and I'm thrilled to be here and really looking forward to these courses.
Wonderful. We like to start these conversations with you thinking out loud a bit about for folks who choose to enroll in your course, what do they get from taking the one-day course with you?
Well, I am just as excited about this course as the other one that I'm doing this summer. This gives me the opportunity to talk in depth about one of my real passions, which is data generation. And I choose the term very deliberately. I have switched, and I was speaking about this with my colleague Robert Thornburg, with whom I worked on a recent grounded theory book. I've switched from the term data collection to data generation over the last year or so because I feel it reflects much better what we really do in the qualitative field. And it recognizes and acknowledges and I think respects the way in which we really work with participants to produce and to co-construct data rather than, this notion of going out and collecting it. So that's the first thing that I would say, that it's a very deliberate choice of term. And I think that sort of philosophy underpins a lot of the conversations that we'll be having in this one-day course. Um, I suppose this is really an in-depth focus on then three particular types of data generation: individual interviews, focus group interviews, and observation of field observations of different kinds. And I suppose, I've chosen these because I feel they are the most commonly used data generation methods in the qualitative field. And they're more than likely the sorts of methods that our participants are going to either have used or want to learn more about. And I suppose, I'm going to do quite a lot in relation to them. It will be, learning about how to construct effective and meaningful schedules for these types of data generation. So very much focusing on how to develop open types of questions that help us elicit and construct data with our participants. We'll be doing lots of exercises in this regard as well. But one of the things I think beginning or early career researchers need in this regard is practice, and having the opportunity to ask each other some questions and to see the effect of how some questions or even the tone of some questions can shut people down rather than open people up. And to talk about, this is not, a research interview. What is even a research interview? We're trying to connect with people. One of the things that I'll be drawing on very strongly is Kathy Sharma's great work, completely leaving aside her grounded theory orientation, but she wrote so beautifully about interviewing and about the importance of building rapport with participants and being that interested learner in their lives. And that has always sat really, really strongly with me. And I would put a lot of emphasis on developing relationships with participants. And I'll be explaining that very much in this course, and how much of the quality of the data And it's all about the data, right? It's all about the quality of our data. And so much in my experience of the quality of the data depends on the rapport and the relationship and fundamentally the trust that we can build with our participants. So I'll be explaining that not just from a data quality perspective, though that's fundamental, but also, I think importantly, from a qualitative perspective, from an ethical viewpoint. And, I think that ties in really importantly to the sort of the ethos that underpins a lot of critical inquiry these days, that we're not just, we're not fakely relating to our participants to get good data. This is a genuine enterprise of co-construction. So there'll be a lot of those kind of core principles, I think, that I will address even briefly, because they underpin important qualitative data generation strategies.
I always love listening to you because I think all of us here share this being very intentional. You use the word deliberate in terminology, and what's so great about what you're putting forward and teaching us all today is your use of the word with, and it's so easy to ignore those kind of short but important words. It really is such a vital piece. The interested learner expression, all of that comes where we really shift orientation to with. That's really a driving force, isn't it?
For sure. And yeah, that's part of the data generation. It's researching with. Now, cards on the table time. I'm fundamentally influenced by the social justice orientation sort of research that I have. And that informs a lot of the work that I do. But I think that aligns very well with most qualitative research. And it's one of the things I'm trying to work on and develop in my own practice as well, is what are the sorts of strategies that we can develop and use meaningfully in our data generation and, of course, analysis and throughout the research cycle, for researching with in a meaningful way. And what does that actually look like then in terms of interview practice? What is the questioning like? To what extent does the researcher have permission to feel comfortable about inserting themselves in the interview? And to have that really honest conversation, I think, with participants on the course will be really valuable, because early career researchers are often quite worried about that, well, I won't reveal anything about myself and I'm the neutral data collector. So I'd like to really kind of blow up that, I think, and to say, no, this is what we're doing. We are in this study with our participants. And what does that mean for authentic data generation processes?
That's great. Yeah, it's such a pathway to accomplish the goal of co-construction too.
Yes.
So, Paul, let me just invite you into our conversation here.
Sure. So I guess I'll start by just sharing that sometimes when I meet with students, they'll ask me when they should start analyzing data or when they could. And I oftentimes tell them you probably already are in data generation, you're probably already analyzing it. And I just wonder if you could just talk about how this course sort of prepares people for analysis as well as prepares them for generating data.
Oh, I think that's a great question, because you're absolutely right. We start analysis immediately, don't we?
Mhm.
As soon as we sit down with the participant, we're analyzing, we're interpreting. We may not do the actual on paper or on screen coding for a little while, but we're analyzing from the start. And I think for sure I will be, discussing that with participants, that, from the moment we sit down with the participant, we are starting analysis. We are starting what I call, that immersion stage, where, and I suppose, that happens right throughout. Yeah, at the end of an interview, I would always advise participants to sit down immediately if they can. Obviously, there are sometimes constraints in the field, but as soon as possible, and just sit down and brainstorm about it and journal what stood out to me there. What are the and basic analysis can actually start right there. You don't need to start coding immediately to be waiting for analysis to happen. And we'll be talking through, of course, the practical stuff relating to all of that, about recording and testing equipment, and all of those sorts of practical considerations are, I think, important to address, and testing them out, because that reduces the anxiety that maybe people who are interviewing for the first time will understandably encounter in the field.
We can think about explicit stages, but thank you, Paul, and Elaine, your follow to Paul's question about pointing out that, be mindful of the fact that the so-called phases don't shift very cleanly and necessarily emerge as you're working through. It's fabulous. Jeff, what's on your mind as you're listening?
One of the things I was thinking, and I hope this doesn't go too far afield, but just wondering, obviously, since the COVID era began several years ago, much of the work the interaction that we had went from being in person to being online. And I think that's true of observation as well. We have different ways that we can observe communities in different areas, even online. But I'm just wondering how the techniques and practices that you'll be discussing, how they may differ or may not differ when doing online work as opposed to in-person interviews or focus groups.
Yeah, that's a great question because so many researchers now are conducting, research online. And I think it's great that we have that opportunity. There are a lot of studies that are being done now that couldn't be done before. I always do advise people that if they can do it in person, it's often preferable, but it's much better to have online rather than nothing. I think, yeah, there's a lot of skills. For me, effective interviewing of any kind is it's all based on the rapport. Now, I think that the interviewer absolutely will possibly need to, or absolutely will need to work harder to establish that rapport. It just tends to be easier in person, but there are techniques that we can use to establish rapport even when we're working online. I mean, I think one of the things early career researchers or more established researchers who haven't done this before need to think about that rapport isn't something that you just do in the moment with the person. Rapport and trust happens over time. So from the very first point of contact, that is when the potential participant is looking and going, is this something I want to do? Is this somebody I can trust? So for me, this is all about, part of what I'll be talking about is developing clear and kind of trustworthy documentation, that's clear about the sorts of questions perhaps they're going to be asked, the importance of the research, principles of informed consent, all of those things that the potential participant can look at and go, yeah, I think this is somebody that I can trust. So building rapport in those kind of even data generation steps, I think is really important. And having, a couple of emails back and forth, that sort of thing can establish rapport before you get to the screen. So there'll be very practical things like that, I think, that we can certainly be mentioning as well.
Right. So when we imagine again this person sitting and learning and taking the course, what would you say are valuable takeaways? You've mentioned a lot of practical pieces, but yeah, what do you take the topic from there? What do you think is a good takeaway for folks?
Sure. Well, one of the key things is I think that researchers often come to a project thinking vaguely about, yeah, I'll do interviews or focus groups, or maybe observations, but they don't really have a clear rationale for choosing one over the other or a combination of both. And I often think one of the myths that I always enjoy dispelling is that focus groups are an easy way to do a load of interviews in one go. Because they, as you all know, they certainly are not. So one of the things I'll be talking about, and that I think the participants will get a very clear sense of, is first of all, should I be doing interviews, individual interviews, or focus group interviews, or observations, or a combination thereof, and why? And how does that suit my actual research question? So we'll look at that for sure. But as part of that, to look at, what is the rationale for doing group interviews versus individual interviews? It isn't just a simple way of getting the data from 6 people, and to talk about the way the dynamics between people work there and how to and the additional skills that are needed to actually manage a focus group conversation, which are, very, very complicated. I've done them quite a lot of focus groups with children as well as young people as well as academics, and they are tricky. And I think you need a really carefully thought out rationale for why you're doing that.
Mhm.
So I tend to put people off doing it unless they know what they're doing. So they'll go away knowing whether they should do individual or group interviews or indeed observations as well. But I think another takeaway that they'll have is that, knowing which ones that they may pursue is one thing, but then how to sequence them is another. Because they may decide, you know what, I feel like I need to do interviews as well as focus groups or observations or whatever their combination is. But often they haven't thought about in what sequence and for what reason. So very often, for example, mixed methods can be two qualitative methods. So what type of a mixed methods double qual is this? Is if it's explanatory, here's where we come back to planning. We need to allow a significant amount of time after, for example, individual interviews to analyze those interviews if they're to inform the design of the next qual stage, which might be the focus groups. So there's a lot to unpack there and to think about in terms of sequencing and being deliberate in our planning there. So I think that will be another key takeaway, that they'll have thought through the kind of implications of the sequencing relative to their research question. And finally, I think as well, we will have to tackle that tough question that nobody likes answering, and there isn't really an answer to, about how much data is enough.
Mhm.
We'll talk about what that means, what is enough, what is data adequacy, how different methodologies have different rules and possible numbers, because a lot of projects may not have enough, but it's also equally important to not overplan. And beginning researchers often think, oh, I'll do 50 interviews and I'll do this and I'll do that. So to rein it in a little bit and to think about what's possible in the time frame. And it's really important, I think, as well for researchers to understand how much one interview produces in terms of data and how not to be overwhelmed. So we'll talk about, feasibility and parameters there, I think, as well. So that would be another key takeaway.
So you started us off today in this conversation about the course, and doing a real nice explanation of the movement to data generation rather than collection. And I've listened to you and go through, processing kind of what we've heard today. I think about several people who have this vision of, I'm going to be collecting data and now realizing generating. And it seems like there's a necessary shift, not just to get it all set and know what you're doing before interview one, and then same process all the way through. Can you just, as we close out today, talk a little bit about what happens in the in between? You did interview one, now you do interview two, now you're at focus group 7. What's happening in between each one of the data collection, the data generation episodes?
For sure. We will for sure talk about that, because I think there is an awful lot of learning that as a researcher you gain between data generation incidents or experiences. And I think that will have to be part of the conversation when we talk about the construction and the ongoing evolution of our interview guides. Some people call them guides, some people call them schedules, and how questions and their probes can evolve. And that's okay, that we can build on our emerging analysis. Now, of course, some methodologies have that built into their design, like in grounded theory. It's one form of theoretical sampling that, our ongoing analysis informs the next questions that we ask, even in between individual interviews sometimes. So some methodologies allow for that more explicitly than others, but whether they do or not, it is what happens as a qualitative researcher. We cannot deny, sorry, that we are influenced by the previous research encounter and experience. So we will talk, I think, about how we need to bring those critical reflections into our evolving research instrument, and of course, how we are research instruments in that process ourselves.
Beautiful. Great. And as we wrap up, I always want to give an invitation if anybody wants to point anything out or another question for Elaine. And of course, Elaine, if there's anything you want to say in conclusion for today's conversation. So open floor, if we will.
I'm just really looking forward to the course, and just sort of thinking about research as a creative act. And I think this idea of generation suggests creativity in the sense that we are we are co-constructing and creating, and I think it's really exciting, and I think it really is something that people can really learn to enjoy more than they do.
Beautiful.
Yes, I think so. I think so very much. And I think that links very nicely as well to the sort of participatory methods that I'm starting to use a lot in grounded theory, for example. But they can equally, and of course they are very widely used across many qualitative methods, participatory principles and using them to, for example, to build meaningful opportunities for participants to engage in the research process. So that might be something that we can look at as well a little bit, depending on which overall methodologies our participants in the course may or may not be using, about making that kind of part of the creative participatory process for sure.
So that sounds like you're going to be doing a lot of what we do in data generation, is being aware of being flexible and kind of adjusting
Yes.
as we flow. It's great.
It depends. It's never a satisfactory answer, but it's often the correct one. It depends.
Well, you always do such a nice, thorough, and relevant, important way of, the conditions of it depends and the follow through. So yeah, an empty it depends always kind of feels like, oh
Yes,
no.
yeah.
So I think you're wonderful at facilitating and guiding folks through the different look and feel to the depends. So it's great. Wonderful. So yeah, for folks who have been watching, hopefully we will see you on July 23rd, and you'll have an opportunity to engage and learn with Elaine. We will follow the conversation here with a slide that gives more information about how you can learn more about the course at our website and hopefully register. So thank you so much for your time, Elaine. Of course, thank you, Paul. Thank you, Jeff.
A pleasure.
And, yeah, so enjoy the rest of your day. And again, thank you. Thank you.